Here we go. Call to order the November 20th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Bobby, call the roll, please.
Rich Daly,
Present.
Paul Fisher,
Here.
Robert Hartsoe,
Here.
Tundra King, Carrie Ann Worley,
Here.
Carla Coleman,
Here.
Fred Stacer.
Here. So tonight, Carrie Ann is sitting in the vacated seat, I believe, of Darlene Smith, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay. All right, and the next item on our agenda is our typical 30-second moment of silence. So if you would, the next 30 seconds, please be silent. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the September 25th, 2024 meeting. Chair will entertain a motion.
I make a motion for the approval of the minutes and if there are any corrections. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any adjustments, corrections, anybody? Any questions? Bobby, call the roll on approval of the minutes.
Tundra King,
Yes.
Carla Coleman,
Yes.
Rich Daly,
Yes.
Paul Fisher,
Yes.
Robert Hartsoe,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Worley,
Yes.
Fred Stacer.
Yes. Okay, next item on the agenda is individuals who will be testifying tonight. At this time, please stand and be sworn in by the secretary.
Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to say that we didn't have time on the internet to take off items number 2, what were previously items number 2 and 3 on our agenda, which are text amendments related to the air park. If anybody is here for that tonight, we're not going to hear those. Those have been removed from our agenda. So just want to let you know that so you don't stick around and find out they're not on there. So thank you very much. The first item in our agenda is 580 Bryony. It's P&Z 24-12503. Project location is 580 Bryony Avenue. Diego, you're up, sir.
Mr. Chair, very quickly, if I could just speak for a moment.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you. I would just like to recommend that we potentially table this item. We had an election, and the current seated member that this district would be affecting this district, this item, is no longer representing that district. And for all intents and purposes, we should see that that member of the commission have the opportunity to appoint a member of this board. So with that, I would recommend and ask that we consider tabling this item.
Mr. Attorney, do we have to rule on that prior to hearing the item? Is that what we do?
Should you decide to table, I think you can go ahead and do that now. The problem with doing it at this juncture is that you have an applicant who has followed the appropriate steps. And my suggestion is you do the presentation first so that you at least have a record created. And should the board decide at that point in time to table and not vote on the item, you can very clearly do that. But I think because you have an applicant who has followed the proper procedures in order to get to this juncture, to table it, at least not, because you'd always have to give them an opportunity to respond, and you really get into sort of the meat and potatoes almost of the item itself. So
Okay.
my suggestion is that if you're going to table, you would wait until after the presentation, giving them an opportunity at least to create the record, and then be prepared to, if you do table, to state your reasons for tabling, as Mr. Daly has done so.
Okay. All right. So with that, I guess we'll just move forward with it until such time that we have the actual recommendation then.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Board of Members. I'm Diego Guevara with Development Services. The subject for discussion tonight is 580 Briny Major Site Plan. Here you can see location and aerial view of the property. The parcel is located at the northeast corner intersection of Briny Avenue and Southeast 6th Street. Here, the applicant is requesting major site plan approval to construct a mixed-use building, including 17 residential units, 1 commercial unit, amenities for the residents, which include pool, gym, villas, lounge, and 42 parking spaces. The height of the building is 104.5 feet height, and it's around 10 stories. The DRC reviewed the site plan on October 2nd, 2024, and the AAC, the Architectural Appearance Committee, reviewed it and approved the application for major building design on November 5th. The parcel is located in the multiple family residential 20 zoning district and is also within the Atlantic Overlay District. The land use designation is medium height. This is a larger view of the site plan. Should the board find the application has provided competent, substantial evidence to satisfy the review standards for major site plan approval, the Development Services Department recommends approval of the major site plan subject to the following conditions. First, successfully obtain the following prior to building permit zoning compliance permit issuance. A, obtain approval from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for all proposed lighting visible from the beach. B, obtain approval from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for all modifications to the existing dunes and dune vegetation. C, provide a final SCAT approval letter from the School Board of Broward County. D, provide an approved valet parking agreement. Second, the standards conditions of approval listed as A through E and specification required prior to building permit zoning compliance permit issuance. This concludes the presentation from the staff. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Anybody have any questions of staff before we move to the applicant? Seeing none. Applicant, sir?
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. Andrew Shine here representing the property owner. With me, I also have Jero Yates and Joy Jasinski with FSMY, and Bill Maholter with Claridge Homes in the audience as well. This is the 580 Briny project. A little bit of an agenda for today. First, I'll go very brief history of the project and how we got here, then a project overview, a comparison to the code and the code requirements, concerns that we've heard over the past 2.5 years going through this project, and then the site plan review standards. A little bit of history. This project was brought to the Planning and Zoning Board last June as a planned development. And when you do a planned development, it means you're asking for things that the code doesn't allow. And you have to give back things to the city and to the neighborhood. It's a trade-off for a PD. What we were asking for is a little bit extra height, about 112 feet instead of 105 maximum. And we were asking for extra density, 28 units instead of 17 units. Our give back in that sense was we increased the setbacks beyond what the code would allow so that we had a little bit less building mass than would be allowed, dune restoration, and other public improvements. The Planning and Zoning Board, it was only a review and recommendation, but they recommended denial of that planned development. And we thought long and hard about it and decided to go back to the drawing board and come back with a project that fully meets code. Well, when we did that, we also redesigned it and kept some of those givebacks that we had in the plan development. So even though we meet code, we didn't maximize our developable area, and we kept a lot of those features that were more positive to the neighborhood and the street in this new one. And we submitted this on April 10th of this year, so we're about a little over 7 months through the DRC process. We had 3 rounds of DRC reviews, a lot of back and forth with city staff to really make sure that this met every single part of the code. Black and white, no gray areas. I think it was Diego, the planner, it might have been Max that I spoke to. But when we were going through this, there are some parts of the code that are gray areas and that are open for staff interpretation, and that could be trade-offs. And I said to staff, I don't want any of that. No interpretations, no gray areas. We are doing this by the letter of the code, and I want it reviewed by the letter of the code. Brief overview of the project. The project is located at 580 Briney. This is a far aerial. This is a little closer aerial. It's, outdated. It was a 17-unit hotel. They called it a resort. I think it was a motel. And it's since been demolished. The project overview, overall, it's 17 residential units in a 10-story building. There's about 500 square feet of commercial on the ground floor. It's a small commercial space meant to be more neighborhood-type commercial, thinking, we don't have a tenant yet, but thinking like sundry shop or grab-and-go food for the beach. So just small retail component. 42 structured parking spaces for 17 units, valet parking. There is a dedicated drop-off lane, and I'll get into a little bit more into that, but it's to take traffic off of Briney and into the project as soon as possible. We are keeping the enhanced dune planting. We did put trees and vegetation on the plans. Ultimately, this is going through Florida Department of Environmental Protection permitting. All final says on dune planting are going to be up to them, but our plan does include enhanced dune planting and removal of invasive species on the dunes as well. So we did keep those things from the previous plan development. This is a rendering of the project looking northeast. This is a rendering of the project looking northwest from the beach. This is the ground floor where you can see the enhanced landscaping on the street as well as that pull-in area. This is an overall oblique view looking southwest. Just to the south where you see the high-rises, that's an RM45 HR district. They have essentially unlimited height and much higher density than we're allowed. One block in between is zoned RM20, but it's not in the Atlantic overlay, and everything north is in the Atlantic overlay. So everything north of this up to Atlantic, you can do 105 feet for multifamily residential or up to 210 feet for hotels. This is the landscape plan. Again, you can see significantly enhanced landscaping from what exists out there. Heavily landscaping the frontage of Briney, including the vehicular use area on both sides of the driveway. There's also enhanced planting on the north to help block views from the neighbor to the north. Comparison of the code. As I mentioned, we and staff went through this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that this met every single section of the code. The code sections, the applicable ones are Articles 3, 4, and 5 of the code. What I'm going to go through is a lot of the big ticket items in Article 3, 4, and 5. Everything else, like things like specific tree species, were already reviewed by staff. I'm not going to go into the minutia of that, but that already was reviewed and signed off by staff. Maximum lot coverage is 72% in the AOD. The underlying max is 60%, but you're allowed to go up 20% more than that. So not to 80%, but 20% of 60%, so up to 72% in the AOD, and we're at 71.1. Minimum pervious area, there's no minimum pervious area for mixed-use projects. We're providing 5,081 square feet. That is mostly in landscaping and grass, which is about 20.1% of the site. That does not include any of the dunes either. We can't count anything east of, it's called the historic dune vegetation line. That doesn't count for us, but it's a lot more pervious if you do count that. But not counting that, it's about 5,000 square feet when none is required. Height max 105 feet. I wrote 105. We're at 104.5 feet to the roof, so we're under the height. The front setbacks, in the AOD, you have a minimum and a maximum setback a lot of the times. Here it's 5 feet minimum and then 15 feet maximum. We have 5 feet and 15 feet to the balcony. And this is what that looks like. It's on the right side of the plan. Generally, what the code suggests is to bring your entire building within that build to line. It's not a requirement to bring your entire building, but that's what the code suggests. And that's, maximizing your square footage. You want to bring the building as you want to have, if you could get a 1 foot setback, you're going to want to build a 1 foot setback so you can maximize the square footage. Here we didn't do that. The 5 feet is only a small portion of the ground floor, which is just to meet the code requirement. And the rest of it above that ground floor is pushed back 15 feet to lower the massing of it on the street. So this was actually an interesting thing to go through staff with, where staff wanted us to make the building essentially more massive than it was. And we said we would love to do that, but we know the history of this and we want to still respect the previous plan and give as much back as we can, even though we don't need to. We wanted to keep it similar. So it's set back further than it needs to be on the west, which is briny. On the north, it's a 5 foot minimum at the ground floor and 15 feet above 50 feet. So in the AOD, when you're at 50 feet, you have to do an additional step back. So think of it as like a normal podium. You could have your podium up 5 stories, step back 10 feet, and have the tower above that. We're at 5 feet 1 inch at the ground floor and 34 feet above 15 feet. So this is the side setbacks that are shown. On plan left, that's the north. The orange is the setbacks that we could do. You can do 5 feet all the way up to 50, step back 10 and go all the way up. Same on the east side. Instead of doing that, we kept it, again, similar to it was in the previous application when we were giving things back. We decided we're going to keep the setbacks as they were, much larger setbacks than are needed on the upper floors, and we're going to keep that light coming through, and we're going to keep as much of those view corridors as we can, again, even though it wasn't needed. On the south, it's also 5 feet at the ground floor, 15 above 50. We did, again, 15 above the first floor. So plan right could have built in that spot as well, which would have interfered on the beach and been more massing than necessary on that beach access road. So could have done it, but didn't. Rear setback 5 feet minimum. We're providing 5 feet. This is not to our property line. Again, we can't use most of the property because you can't do anything east of the dune vegetation line, and it doesn't count for setbacks. It doesn't count for lot coverage. So we're somewhere around, 95 feet from the property line, but 5 feet from where we have to measure it by the city. Facade in the build-to zone, that's that area between 5 and 15 feet facing the street. And the requirement is to provide a minimum of 50% of the building in that, and that's a minimum. So again, this suggests that the code really wants you to bring as much of the building close to the street as you can. And we had to find a way to make staff happy in that we meet code, but also keep our design intent of lowering the massing of the building. So what we did is all of the red areas are what's in our build-to zone. On the south, not an issue at all. The building is 5 feet from the property line, so south wasn't an issue. On the west, we have the porte-cochere and we have that driveway, which means we can't move the entire building to the street. 1, we don't want to. 2, the neighbors don't want to. And 3, we wouldn't be able to have that driveway. So what we did is we brought an overhang of the driveway. So it's a covered porte-cochere. We brought one of the utility rooms and a bit of the storefront up to be in that build-to zone. It's the minimum amount that to meet code in that build-to zone. We would have been happy to bring the entire building out and get a lot more sellable square footage. But to keep the design, keep the respect to the neighborhood, keep the respect to the street, we put the bare minimum that we needed in that build-to zone. The building is pushed back, frankly, as far as we can do it under the code. But we do meet it. Fenestration percent, this is the minimum clear glass, doorways, openings that have to be within the build to zone. We have, this is a diagram, it's in the package, but we have 64% on Bryony and 77% on Southeast 6, so we significantly exceed that requirement. It's a little hard to read, but it's in the packet. Ground floor habitable space minimum, at least 75% of at least one of the street-facing facades has to be habitable space, and we have 78.1% on Southeast 6th Street. The habitable space on Bryony, we didn't have to measure it because we only had to meet the part of the code on 6th. Most of the Bryony streetscape is habitable space, but we have things like the parking garage entrance. The lobby entrance is considered habitable space, a retail space, but we counted it as the Southeast 6th Street. We meet the code even though we exceed the code, including the west, but the goal was just meet the code there. Parking. There is no parking requirement for residential uses vertically integrated within a mixed-use building if you have a valid building permit as of January 4th, 2026. So this, as long as we had our permit in hand by January 4th, which if approved tonight would have given us over a year to get a permit, we wouldn't have had to include any parking spaces. We do know that parking is frequently an issue on Bryony. We've heard about that. And we are including 42 spaces in it. So 2.4 per unit, exceeding, even if it was just a normal multifamily development, we're still exceeding the parking requirement there. So 42 spaces where none are required. Minimum lot area is 8,800 square feet for multifamily in the RM20. We have a larger lot area than that. Lot width minimum 75 feet. Our lot is 160 by 242, so we exceed that. Density maximum is 20 units an acre, which would get us about, we have 19.1 units an acre. 20 units an acre would get like 17.7 units, but it rounds down. But we're under the maximum density. The design standards vary. I'm not going to get into too much detail of the exact design standards. This was unanimously approved by the Architectural Appearance Committee, who is in charge of reviewing the design of the project. Briefly, though, it's a nautical modern design, have all of the required features of nautical modern in the code. So canopy storefronts, flat roofs, stucco, parapets, etc. Again, not going to get into that. It was reviewed by AEC and approved unanimously by that board. Number of trees, we need 13, one per 3,000 square feet of lot area. We have about 53 trees, including about 53 trees, a mix of palms and shade. Number of shrubs, we need 65. We have 70 plus shrubs. Street trees, we need 4 street trees or 1 per 40 feet of street frontage, and this is along Bryony. We have 12 street trees, so 3 times the amount that's required. Perimeter VUA landscaping. This is the landscaping that is required adjacent to any vehicular use area. In our case, it's that driveway. I did try arguing that the driveway really doesn't count as VUA in this circumstance since a lot of it's undercover. Staff disagreed, and I said, we'll comply with whatever you want at that point. So we did provide the additional perimeter landscaping, minimum 10 feet in width, and we have 22 feet 2 inches in width between the driveway and the street. Landscaping between the VUA and the building. I also had a disagreement with staff on this. It says that the VUA landscaping is not required between the VUA and the building and anywhere where there are building entrances. And we frankly have building entrances all along the porte cochere. It's a nice lobby, but staff took it as anywhere where there aren't exactly doors in that spot. So we said, okay, we'll comply. We'll find a way to make that work. So we did. The requirement we're averaging to average 12 feet in width, which equates to about 485 square feet of landscape between the porte cochere and the building, and we're providing 1,480 square feet. So we went from me arguing that this doesn't apply, which I still believe it doesn't apply, to doing 3 times the amount that staff asked us to. We've been at this for a while now. This was first submitted early 2023, late 2022. So over the last 2.5, 3 years, we have heard many concerns from the neighbors, emails, calls, people speaking at meetings, and I'll go through some of them. The biggest concern is the type of of development. Folks saw a townhouse development being built just to the south of us across Southeast 6th Street and said, we'd be happy with townhouses. Why can't you do townhouses? And that's been a big point of contention, and it's been an impasse with the neighborhood because we can make concessions on building placement or landscaping, tree species. We can make concessions on a lot of things. What we can't make concessions on is really the type of development, and that's driven more by the market. Here's just a little comparison. We have the developable part of our lot, so west of the historic dune vegetation is about 25,000 square feet, and similar for the property to the south, it's about 28,000 square feet. This property is in the AOD, which has different development rights. The property to the south of us is not in the AOD. They have different development rights. 35 feet in height versus 105 feet in height. Land sellers are not dumb. People who are dealing with millions of dollars worth of land know what they can do on the property, and they know what the land is worth. A piece of property that is limited to 35 feet in height is going to be priced differently than a piece of property you can go to 105 feet in height. So just a comparison, the price per square foot for this property is about $454 a square foot, and the property to the south is about $172. So a little less than 3 times the amount because those development rates are different. So when we hear, why can't you just do townhouses? The property to the south did townhouses. It's in a different zoning district. It's priced differently. When the city zoned this property, it chose this property and chose to zone it differently than the property to the south because the city at some point when this was passed wanted a maximum of 105 feet height here. South of 6th Street, they didn't want 105 feet. They wanted 35 feet. So again, the type of development is a concern, but it doesn't, asking can you do townhouses, it's a great question. It's a complicated answer, and it really just comes down to the financials of it. We can either keep an old motel that was run down and used by vagrants and other not great characters, or we can make the project better, but you can't do townhouses on a place that's not priced for townhouses. We also saw an email about something about it was a little vague, but alleging that we're east of the coastal construction control line and that there's an issue with that. We are east of the coastal construction control line. The person who sent that email also developed a house east of the coastal construction control line. So I'm not sure why that's an issue. This is from the frequently asked questions on FDEP's website. Can I build or rebuild seaward of the coastal construction control line? In all caps, FDEP says yes. It's not a line of prohibition. So not sure why that's an issue. It does require us to do extra permitting through Florida Department of Environmental Protection, but we're doing that. Every property east of the CCCL has to do that. There was also a vague reference to issues with something about not meeting FDEP and ERC and Fish and Wildlife Commission recommendations. And there was a link to click on. It was an email sent, and it was from a prominent member of the public saying we don't meet some of these criteria. And I really don't want to go through this, but I'm going to just because it was sent out to members of this board. What was sent was Section 3109 of the Florida Building Code, which has to deal with construction east of the coastal construction control line. I did mock responses. The first is, yes, this section applies. That's really it. The second is that on the bottom is that you have to obtain DEP approval prior to construction for things like lights, planting. Yes, we're aware of that. We're in DEP permitting right now. It does take a little bit of time. But yes, we acknowledge it. Our exterior lights, as shown on the plans, are all the amber turtle lighting. We have all the model numbers, so it will meet that. Next is that we have to give an elevation certificate upon the starting of construction. We agreed. These are all just definitions. This is that we have to comply with certain flood proofing measures. Acknowledged. We will do that during construction. This property is built, it's going to be built at a 13-foot finished floor elevation, which significantly exceeds the FEMA requirement. The just to the east of us on the beach side is it's zone VE for flood, which is a 13-foot there. We're not in that flood elevation, but for resilience purposes, we're still building to 13 feet NAVD. So we're not expecting to do any additional flood proofing measures. That's usually for rehabs, not new construction. More comments and requirements about flood protection, which yes, will comply. Our foundations will comply. Our pilings will comply. Our shear walls will comply. Everything we will comply with. So I'm not sure why this was sent out as something that we apparently violate. We haven't even gotten the FDEP permit yet. So I did put here that this is not relevant to the site plan application that's in front of you. So it was brought up. I'm going to mention it. None of this is relevant to the analysis tonight, though. Another concern is traffic. If I were coming in with a 500-unit development here, I would have our traffic engineer in the audience, and I would make sure that we're really buttoned up and needing to do that. We didn't even trip a threshold for a traffic study. It's 17 units. So I guess traffic is more of a catch-all complaint, but I don't really think it should be applied to this project. And just for a comparison, here's on Briney Avenue. These are all the residential projects that I was able to find on Briney. Does not include any hotels or motels. All of the current existing, and plus Salado, which is under construction. There are 1,427 about existing residential units, including the 40 that are under construction at Salado. This is 580 Briney, which is 17 units. So with 580 Briney, there will be approximately 1,444 units, or a 1.1% increase in cars, assuming all of those cars are on the road when everybody else is. And just to put that into perspective, if you have a 5-minute commute, a 1.1% increase, and this is not apples to apples, but a 1.1% increase on a 5-minute commute would be a 5-minute and 3-second commute. So I'm not sure that traffic is really a concern here. Next is we heard about utilities, drainage, sewer, water, fire, and EMS. For drainage, since this is a new project, all new projects are required to retain all of their own stormwater on their own site. The project that we demolished, the motel, did not have to do that. It was old. So floodwaters were able to come off of that property and go into the street. Similarly, a lot of these other properties on Briney are older and predated these county requirements. But for us, we are required to retain all of our stormwater on site. We're doing that through trench drains where they're needed, as well as drainage wells in the garage. We also couldn't count it towards our drainage, but we are adding a significant amount of landscaping outside of the property line, which will hopefully help drainage that is stormwater flooding that's caused by other properties. So not only are we going to retain all of our own stormwater on site, not a favor, we're required to do that, but we're hoping that this also helps stormwater that comes off of other properties. Water and sewer, anytime a project comes to the Planning and Zoning Board, the city's utilities department reviews it for water and sewer capacity, so it wouldn't be here if there wasn't capacity. We did get kind of lucky. Briney has a lot of water and sewer infrastructure in it. There are 2 sewer mains. One's an 18-inch force main. The other is an 8-inch sanitary main. There's also an 8-inch water main. So we're only adding 17 units to this. There are no water and sewer capacity issues. And for 17 units, all the city required of us is a simple 6-inch lateral into the mains. So we're not worried about utilities at all. Fire and EMS response times. If this was 2 or 3 years ago, this would be a big issue. These are the fire and EMS response times in 2022 that we got from your fire department. The National Fire Protection standards generally range between 6-minute suggestion to 8 minutes for EMS and low to medium hazard fires. And in 2022, the city was not doing well on the beach for that. They were above 8 minutes for most calls. 2 new stations did come online since then, and these are the current, as of a couple months ago, but fairly current times obtained by your fire department, and they're all between 6 and 7 minute response times on the beach now. So significant improvement, and not expecting any issues with that either. Last section is the site plan review standards. I'm going to go through these one by one. There are 12 of them. You don't have to squint at this. But these are the site plan review standards that the Planning and Zoning Board is bound by when reviewing site plan applications. And I do want to read the preamble out loud because it's important. An application for a major site plan or minor site plan shall be approved only on a finding that there is competent substantial evidence in the record that the development as proposed, and for the first one, is consistent with the land use designation in the comprehensive plan. On the left is from the land use plan map. It's designated medium-high residential. On the right is what you can do in the residential land use. Medium-high is allowed up to 25 units per gross acre. We are at 17 units per net acre, so we're significantly under the maximum density. Residential uses are, of course, allowed. And right under there, you could see that in medium-high residential, you can do neighborhood retail sales or service uses as long as no more than 50% of the floor area is dedicated to that. So number one, consistent with the comp plan, yes, no questions. Second is that it complies with the applicable district, use, and intensity and dimensional standards of the code, found in Articles 3, 4, and 5. When I went through that major checklist, all these are all from Articles 3, 4, and 5. We meet all of them. Again, there are other minutia in Articles 3, 4, and 5, tree species, exactly, how far a tree has to be from your sewer lateral. Minor stuff that I didn't get into that's just reviewed as a matter of course by staff. Those are also in Articles 3, 4, and 5. And then lastly, the design is in 3, 4, and 5, but again, that was reviewed by AAC. So there's no question we comply with all applicable district, use, and intensity and dimensional standards of the code, Articles 3, 4, and 5. The third is that it complies, it's a little repetitive, but that it complies with the code and it complies with the standards in Part 8, Sustainable Development Standards. This is where you get into the point system for the 12 required sustainable points. It is a condition of approval that we show that to staff before permit. Most of it's already included in the plans. It's just a standard condition of approval. But at the bottom here, we have 16 points at least. It's an infill development. We have structured parking, efficient water heating and cooling, hurricane resistance up to 150 miles an hour. We're doing 160 miles an hour, as well as overhangs at the building entrances. So we do meet that. 4 is that it complies with all other applicable standards in the code. See previous slides in the staff report for that. We meet the code. Painstakingly went through this to make sure we meet the code. Complies with all requirements or conditions of any other prior applicable development or approved plans. Not applicable. There are no other approved plans that have conditions related to this. That the concurrency review has been completed. As I said before, we wouldn't get here without those concurrency reviews being completed. This is an email. It was for a different project, but it was an email to Nathaniel Watson, who's the utilities director, just confirming that. I said, hi, Nathaniel, just confirming that that all of this is reviewed prior to PZB and that we can't come to PZB without this review being done, and he said, that's correct. 7 is that it's designed to provide safe, adequate, paved vehicular access between buildings within the development and the streets. We, again, made sure to take the traffic off of Bryony because we know it was a concern. This property previously had back-out parking, which is arguably the most dangerous kind of parking for vehicle and pedestrian conflicts. And we went the complete opposite direction and said, let's get all traffic off of Bryony as soon as you can. So we have our own internal driveway. I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but circulation, it'll be valet, park in here, and come out here. So we have provided safe, adequate vehicular access between the buildings and the development, more than probably any other project on Bryony with this dedicated drop-off lane. We also have, these are our site triangles. They're minimum 25 feet. We have more than that, but those are the minimum 25 feet site triangles so that motorists can see left and right and hopefully avoid pedestrian, bicycle, and other vehicle accidents. 8 is that it complies with hazardous material licensing requirements. Not applicable, not doing anything hazardous here. 9 is that it complies with the SEPTED principles. We have in the backup, there's a whole narrative on SEPTED principles and how this project meets it, and there's also a plan showing where those SEPTED infrastructures are located, things like lights and cameras. But very briefly, highlights, there are 5 principles of SEPTED, and SEPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. Night surveillance, storefront facades, we have a lobby attendant, clear lines of sight, security cameras. Access control is the next one. One entry and exit to a garage is suggested, which we have. Gate control to the garage, and individual residents have their own keys as well. Territorial reinforcement is the third principle, differentiating public and private areas, which we've helped through the use of landscaping, and as well as perimeter walls, which we have a perimeter wall and a landscape perimeter as well. Maintenance, can't really prove maintenance as a SEPTED principle during site plan approval, but the maintenance will be done by the homeowners association, so the site will be well maintained. And last is activity support. Suggestions are to provide commercial space on the ground floor, which we're doing, provide amenities at the ground floor, which we're doing, and open balconies with clear glass railings so that, I forgot the exact term, but to keep the eyes on the street. It's a crime prevention. So we meet, exceed every principle of SEPTED. Another one, 10th, is to comply with adopted fire codes and standards per City Code 95.02. Through the DRC process, the fire department or the representative for the fire department does review these plans. Here's an excerpt from our comment responses stating that the P&Z application is able to meet all of the fire department requirements at this time. However, petitioner shall maintain all proper fire department access, water supply requirements, et cetera, as amended from time to time. So we will follow the fire, we followed the fire code during DRC. Most of the fire code issues are worked out during permitting. The project was designed to meet the fire code, and the fire department liaison authorized us to go to PZB with their approval. And all permit plans will be in accordance with that. So we meet this. Second to last is that the project considers and mitigates any adverse impacts on environmentally sensitive lands identified by the comp plan or county plan. There are no environmentally sensitive lands on this site under the comp plan or the county plan. The beach in general could be considered a lowercase environmentally sensitive land, of course, and that's why we're doing the dune restoration, and we have to go through FDEP permitting. So we will meet all of the requirements for any lowercase environmentally sensitive lands, but there are no official environmentally sensitive lands on this site. And last is that it complies with any approved transportation corridor study. There is no approved transportation corridor study for here. Against our best wishes, against our own wishes, the project does respect the existing Bryony streetscape. We would have liked to do things like sidewalks on Bryony. I think sidewalks on Bryony could probably help with a lot of these pedestrian and vehicle conflicts, but Bryony doesn't have sidewalks. We were asked to respect the existing streetscape, so keeping the pavers and no sidewalks. In summary, the previous project was reviewed in 2023, didn't move forward over concerns mostly related to the extra height and density. We redesigned it to meet or exceed the code requirements. We've been going back and forth with DRC and city reviewers for the last 6 months to make sure that this is ironclad, meets code 100%, no gray areas, just black and white. That it meets or exceeds all applicable standards in Article 3, 4, and 5, and that this we presented and throughout this whole process competent substantial evidence that the project meets all site plan review standards. The city's code does define competent substantial evidence. It's evidence that a reasonable mind could accept as adequate to support a conclusion. And I think tonight, again, this was black and white. For site plan reviews like this, it wasn't a subjective determination. There was subjective determination on behalf of the AAC when it comes to the design, but everything that we're looking at tonight, it's do you meet it or not? And we meet or exceed it in every single aspect, and we did that on purpose. There were no cut corners here, not a single dollar saved on value engineering through this. It was by the book and exactly as the code requires. That's a project. In addition to meeting the code, and I'm not saying this because I'm representing the developer here, but it frankly is a beautiful project, and the AAC mentioned that as well. It would be a great addition to the city. At 10 stories, it does fit in between the RM45 and then the higher hotels that you have on Atlantic. And it's frankly a good project. Thank you.
Okay. Before we move to the, for questions, Mr. Shine had called me, and the only reference in the call was that they were going to have a court reporter. We did not discuss the project in any way, shape, or form, but I did want to just put on the record that we had a conversation. And is that your court reporter?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. She's well hidden. I was looking for her, whatever, so, okay.
Marisol, Chair Stacer,
Yes.
Chair Stacer.
Anyway, all right, so does anybody have any questions before we go to the audience?
Yeah, I just have one really quick one.
Go ahead, Mr.
While I understand that it might not necessarily be part of our code, one of the things that you brought up tonight that really rung a bell for me was having to go through FDEP, specifically about the dunes and you mentioned it, an underlying environmental impact. I'm just curious if you guys would be willing to potentially seek their approval before our approval. And it's simply a request, and I understand that it's not technically part of our code and it wouldn't necessarily meet, but it would give me a lot more reassurance on the viability of the property.
So FDEP permitting takes a really long time. Generally, it's run concurrently with city permitting because of how long it takes. That would put us probably at about a 6-month delay right now. And the only reason why I don't think it's necessary is that if FDEP doesn't approve it, then we can't do it. Part of the city's code is getting that approval from all other applicable agencies. So that part is referenced in the city's code. It's to get other that development orders by the Planning and Zoning Board does not get you out of your other obligations. So if DEP doesn't approve it, which we're not expecting, our consultants have worked with DEP many a time and know what's allowed and what's not. But if DEP doesn't approve it, then we're coming back to this board. So that's the only reason why I don't think it's necessary. It's one, it's a major, major delay. And two is that the city is already protected through multiple avenues.
I can understand that, but you wouldn't even be able to break ground regardless without FDEP's approval. So from my perspective, the way I see it is you wouldn't, 6 months delay is not really a delay in that sense.
But then we have to come back to this board and then go through city permitting instead of doing it concurrently.
Okay, I can understand your point.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else before we go to the audience? Okay. Does anybody in the public want to speak on this item? Come on up, give us your name and address, and try to keep your comments to 3 minutes if you could, please.
Yes, thank you. Ann Bosworth, 4015 West Palm Air Drive. Okay. I want to start by saying, and this really isn't directed at you, Mr. Shine. Actually, I think you've done a nice job trying to manage this. It's a complicated situation. But I do want to start by saying that just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So if any of you has ever visited Jonathan Dickinson State Park, the big park up there on the beach, they have a theater. You can go in there. You can watch a whole beautiful, well-produced presentation on impacts of building on the beach and on barrier islands. And everything we know about science says you shouldn't do it. And I would say that this board and the city commission and all who are proposing these things for our city aren't really considering the factual reality of what we're dealing with. We saw what happened in Fort Myers. We saw what happened in Wilbur by the Sea up in Daytona, where the beach basically gave way and people's houses were in the sea. We need to stop. Whenever there are building things that you want done, you change the zoning. When you want something, you keep the zoning the way you want it to get what you want here. I'm wondering why this commission, why this board didn't change the zoning so that we're building less there instead of more? Why didn't you spend your money, our taxpayer dollars, to buy back some of that land to keep it protected? I'm a wildlife enthusiast and a birder. I depend on those animals coming through here. Every single thing you put there, whether there was something there or not, is impacted by what you do. So I think you should keep that in mind. I also want to point out an irony that this commission, or this board and our city commissioners and the plans that you have made have gone on record saying that you want us having less cars. You want us to go multimodal. But there are 2.4 parking slots allotted for a 17-unit building. But I, who live out west, should give up my car and take public transportation to the beach. I'm offended by that, and I think you owe us all a better explanation of your behavior in mapping out the plans for this city. Thank you.
Next person.
Good evening. I'm here regarding the development of 580 Briny Avenue in Pompano
Name and
Beach.
address for the record.
I'm sorry, Luca Fagetti, 4015 West Palmer Drive, Pompano Beach. Thank you.
I'm sorry, the last name?
Luca Fagetti.
Okay. Do you have that? Okay. You
So-
go ahead.
Thank you. The project raises significant environmental and community impact issue. The environmental concerns are for the proposed site lies within a sensitive coastal ecosystem as is already under pressure for overdevelopment. The construction of this big building is a condo, risk further disruption to the area. Erosion risk, coastal development on sandy beach can accelerate erosion, undermining the natural defenses against storm surges and rising sea level. As reported, we have seen what happened in Wilbur by the Sea, where homes has been completely devastated by that. Wildlife habitat, there is an habitat for native species, including shorebirds and sea turtles, where the nest of the turtles is severely impacted from construction and new lights pollution. Community and appearance. The building is not a sustainable plan. It is disproportional compared to the neighbor, low-rise homes. It seems that the city assumption is that it's perfectly acceptable to crowd out low-rise neighbors to achieve its development goals, disrupting the neighbor and straining its resources. We have seen years over year coming up new tall buildings that pretty much one day will remove any sun from the beach, like already happening going south. If this is the plan, this is another building that will achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, anybody else? Come on up.
My name is Terry Sexton. I live at 507 Briny Avenue, which is directly across the street from the 580 property. I've lived on the property at 507 for a little more than 20 years. So I also lived through the year-and-a-half plus process of turning the old Briny Avenue into a streetscape where they spent $5 million to do that. And there is traffic there. The comment just earlier this evening about the suggestion to put in sidewalks at 580, I thought the whole concept of the streetscape is to allow people with buggies, small children, pets, bicycles, motorcycles, everybody to share the street. And we do that now, and we've done that ever since the project was completed. So the concept of sidewalks, I thought, well, we've actually turned the street into a sidewalk along with the road. one of the things that I've noticed since the property was demolished at 580 is that there was the wire fence was put up to surround the property, and then there was a green mesh put over that. But it's been in disarray for a number of months, and with hurricane season, it was pretty much shredded. Within only the last week, they've changed that. But what we've noticed at 507 directly across the street is that with the demolition of the building, we're getting a lot of sediment, and with the wind, stuff from the ocean, stuff from the property itself, our plants and trees are either dead or dying. In my particular case, my building that I live in, with the streetscape being put in, I'm actually below the street level. So what they did with my small front yard is they actually put in a ditch so that when too much water comes onto the small front yard, which is only about, I would say, 8-9 feet between the house and between my building and the street, that it floods, but because of the drain. But right now, it's coming within this much. If this is my front door, this is as close as the water's gotten. So that's the only leeway I have. I'm concerned because of what has happened over the last 6 to 12 months, and with the property going in, I'm not sure, and I hope that something in terms of engineering or whatever can be done for our property at 507. We have enough climate change going on with having it come early because of a structure that really is not for the neighborhood to be put directly across the street from us.
Okay.
And I do appreciate, and I hope that if you vote or converse about Mr. Daly's comment, that you do hold off for the sake of the neighborhood that's already there, for those of us who've been there for a long time. This is a big change. It's not a welcome change for many of us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Drum. I live at 2700 Northeast 8th Street. I would like to state also my opposition to this project, primarily because, as the lady said before me, just because we can doesn't mean that we should, that at some point the development must stop. Again, this is not directed at the gentleman that made the presentation. I used to work in sales. I know the pressures of meeting deadlines and doing thorough research and putting together well-designed plans for expansions and that, and the pressures to sell things. But here I would just want to state that at some point, just because something is only an incremental impact to all the development that we have done, at some point it must stop. I'm retired, and currently I volunteer at the South Florida Wildlife Center, where we treat 10,000 to 12,000 animals per year. Much of this wildlife is injured or orphaned due to continuous urban development in South Florida. Planting trees to replace ripped-out habitat is not a like-for-like substitution, as most urban landscaping requires perpetual maintenance that further increases wildlife loss. Our nursery is overwhelmed every spring through fall with orphaned baby birds and mammals due to tree trimming. Our services are required not just to please concerned citizens who bring in injured and orphaned animals and to make sure that these sweet, innocent creatures get a second chance at life. It's much more than that. It's about wildlife conservation. Wildlife conservation is important to maintain biodiversity and ecosystem balance. Many people don't even know what these terms mean or why they should even matter. Biodiversity is crucial for humans because it provides essential services like clean air and water, food sources, pollination for crops, and pest control. Healthy ecosystems with high biodiversity provide vital services like water filtration, soil formation, carbon sequestration, all of which are essential for human life. And so many people around the area say, oh, those save the turtle people, keeping us in the dark all the time. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, saving one individual turtle can ensure decades of offspring over a lifespan of up to 80 years. And according to the World Wildlife Organization, sea turtles are a fundamental link in marine ecosystems. They help maintain the health of seagrass beds and coral reefs that benefit valuable commercial species and prevent coastal erosion. Sea turtles keep population of jellyfish in check. I could go on with what continuous development, how it provides coastal erosion, and how a lot of the restoration projects that we try to implement to protect are actually more harmful. So I'm just here to state that I want it on record that we please consider these impacts. As with many residents in District 1, I am, of course, concerned with the increased traffic noise and quality of life degradation that will result from continuous overdevelopment. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else want to speak? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at this point. Mr. Schein, was there anything that you wanted to say in reference to what was said?
I don't think there was anything to rebut there.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
All right. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like his opinion on the drainage issue. Would you talk about the drainage issue? One of the folks who came up to speak was concerned about runoff water onto her project, as is happening from the piece of property now. How would that change with your project?
So I actually heard two things. I heard one, that her property was lower than the road, which is going to become a problem in a lot of other places. So I'm sure there's runoff coming from that. From our site right now, I'm not sure exactly what the grade of our site is right now. It probably does not meet the county's requirements for retaining stormwater on site, since it was just demolished. There are remedial things that you can do for like silt screening. But if this project is approved and when it's built, again, we'll be required to retain all of our stormwater on site. We cannot have stormwater drop onto our property and go into the street. The county reviews that, again, fine-tooth comb to make sure that our drainage calculations are accurate, that our drainage infrastructure is proper, so that we do not have runoff onto not only neighboring properties, but we can't even have runoff onto the street. So, again, and I said before, we did some things to make the neighborhood happy here and keep the good parts of the old project. We're not doing this out of the kindness of our heart. It is a requirement. We have to retain our stormwater on site. So if and when this project is built, it cannot lead to runoff onto other sites. But being lower than the crown of the road and the street is a problem that we can't fix.
Okay. Robert, did you have something? Oh, okay. Mr. Fisher, go ahead. Sure.
One, I just want to have some confirmations here. One is this project will not affect any of the public access on 6th Street, correct?
Correct. We're just doing improved landscaping adjacent to that access, making it nicer. There's a lot of invasive scavola over there too that we're removing and doing native planting. But other than that, no.
So the access will still be available to the public?
Yeah, the access itself we're not affecting.
And then kind of jumping on his question, just want to confirm that the plan that you have provided us, I know it doesn't go hand in hand with our approval, but the plan that you provided us about what you want to change with the modifications, with the dunes, that's what you're presenting to the FD EP?
Yes.
Okay, there's no modifications that we're not going to see that you're presenting there, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Unless FDEP changes something.
Tells you
but
to change it.
It wouldn't be, it would be in the mutual interest of everybody if FDEP says, no, you can't do this species, you have to do this species. But
Perfect.
other than that, no, nothing's changing.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Question here.
Yes, Mr. Dowling, go ahead.
Thank you. Piggybacking off of my colleague, Mr. Fisher's question here, if FDEP does require a change, would that force you to come back before us for an additional approval, or is that going to be just something done by the city?
Probably just done by staff. It would, we're not expecting any changes, and I have never seen FDEP. You know, most experienced architects and engineers have worked with FDEP before and designed things that meet FDEP requirements as well as city requirements. So we're not expecting any changes. If there are, they're probably going to be very, very small and would not come in front of this board. Again, things like putting a tree here instead of here, you know, a foot here, a foot there, or your dune mound is going to be, you know, 5 feet high instead of 4 feet 8 inches high, or you know, something along those lines. Nothing major.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mrs. King?
I heard you speak about.
Can I actually get confirmation from staff? I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Could I just get confirmation from staff that that's accurate, what he's stating? Thank you, Max.
Sure.
Sorry.
Sorry, Tundra.
I didn't realize.
Sure. Good evening, Max Weems, Principal Planner Development Services. Significant changes to landscaping that result in a change to a site feature that is assessed by this review process would require that this project be represented to this board. I have never seen an application where we've granted a development order pending the approval of FDEP where any impact of that review resulted in something that constituted a significant change. It's generally the volume of a dune, the makeup of the planting on that dune, the orientation in the locations proposed. It's not generally expanded in a way that's altering the proposed development. Should that be the case, it absolutely would come back to this board.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. Mrs. King? Go ahead.
Yes, I heard you talk about the lighting for the turtles, but some of the concerned citizens also addressed some things about the birds and things of that nature. Did we get anything from Fish, Game, and Wildlife to perhaps address that issue?
For the turtles, we do have to go through that permitting, and we are proposing the approved turtle lighting. It's made for this purpose. As to the birds, I don't know what the general concern regarding birds are. We're not building over any area that wasn't built over before. We're not disturbing any new wildlife areas. The old property was built almost exactly to where we're allowed to build. So I don't know if it's nesting birds or just birds flying. If it's just birds flying, birds hit buildings sometimes. I don't know birds hit two-story townhouses too. But we're not disturbing any area that hasn't been disturbed for the past, since that motel was built.
There's no owl, birds, or anything to your nature?
No. And if there are regulations that stop us from doing construction, and a GC doesn't want to get in trouble with the Endangered Species Act. They know it pretty well. But no, as of now, there's nothing on the property.
Thank you.
Yes. So yes, Mrs. Worley, go ahead.
We talked a little bit about the traffic. I know that's been a big issue, especially just down that quaint road. And obviously the new commissioner that's coming in, I think she's probably got, a lot of information in terms of the people, and you probably already heard all of this stuff. But I guess my question would be more about the traffic you talked about retail. What kind of retail would be put in place, and then how would we control, because you mentioned there's going to be valet. Is the valet for the residents, or is that also going to be for the retail, and what kind of
Valet is just for the residents. The retail is expected to be a grab-and-go style place that complements the beach, so like sundry shops, sunscreen, towels, grab-and-go sandwiches, maybe. It's not meant to be a driver of traffic. It's 563 square feet. It's not going to be a destination retail space.
So there's no, it's not going to be like a restaurant or something like that. It's
Not at 563
Okay.
square feet. Yeah. No grease traps, no hood, no range hoods. It's meant to be a small complement to the project, not a shopping
Got
center.
it. And then, and then you also, the valet, so each resident will have to valet their car automatically. They can't self-park. Got it.
Yep. And there will be a valet attendant 24/7.
How does that control the traffic? And I'm just asking because I've seen in some buildings where it is valet only and, you know, the cars get backed up because people are waiting or.
So just want to preface this with, this is only 17 residential units. So we're not building a massive driver of traffic or parking or any of that. It's 17 units. But if you can see here, we kept all circulation on site. A lot of times you also see valet drivers have to take a public street in order, whip it around the block to do the parking. We kept all of that traffic on our own site away from the street. So there's the stacking spaces here. Again, 17 units. These are going to be luxury condos. Most people are not going to be here for most of the year, and when they are, we're not getting 17 cars at the same time. But there's stacking for at least 4 cars here at the same time, which would be quite a coincidence if that happens, but there is stacking for 4 cars here.
What's the purpose of valet then?
The purpose of valet is we're doing mechanical parking lifts, which the city requires us to do valet. It also is a luxury condo building, so it's just part of the branding of it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, go ahead.
Just want to confirm that you are agreeing to all the conditions set by on our last page of our backup.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Mr. Hartzell, are you pushing that up for a reason? You just wanted to get it out of your way.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Mr. Shine, could you just give your office address for the record, please?
699 North Federal Highway, Suite 400, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33304.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. I think we covered the valet stuff pretty well. In various other parts of the beach, I've seen where condos have whatever, cabanas and whatever. I saw nothing shown on your client's plan. Is there any plans for anything that's whatever, beyond what we're seeing here, other than the dune and walking through it or whatever?
Possibly on the pool deck, not on the beach. No plan for
Okay,
that.
so there's nothing outside of that, whatever that is, 80 or 90 feet from the property line?
No.
Okay. Okay, so the people to the north, the other condos to the north that have stuff all over the place, we're not going to see any of that? No.
Not organized, at least.
Okay. All right. Two other issues I wanted to talk about, one of which is with you. This is always a problem, and so what kind of plan for controlling, obviously there's concrete trucks, there was a townhouse project built south of there. I drove through it several times, once every 2 or 3 months just to see how that traffic and what kind of plan is there for controlling of construction traffic?
I don't have a staging plan to show you, but the increased setback off of Briney and us pushing the building back will definitely help with that. We will have room to load in between the the construction fence, and the eventual building. We will most likely be seeking an MOT plan. Pompano goes through the county for MOT plans, maintenance of traffic.
Okay.
Most likely seeking an MOT for wherever the edge of paving is on Briney, which might be in a little bit of the right of way, but it would be where the asphalt was for the back out parking on this property.
Right.
Other than that, I mean, it is a tight site, so we obviously can't use the north, we can't use the beach, and we can't use the south.
Right.
So construction traffic will be coming in from Briney, most certainly into the property and not having to queue at all in the street.
Okay, I think my question was like, this is gonna get built by whatever, 50 people at a time or something, or whatever, so have there been any arrangements made for, obviously people parking, there will have to be.
1 second.
And I'm sure the people down the street have.
Yes, so at the Planning and Zoning Board, or at City Commission a couple of months ago, there was a project approved at 101 South Ocean, where the Bank of America is, and that will be used for construction parking during construction of this.
Okay, great.
So just, 2 blocks away or so?
Yeah, no, I'm aware of where.
Plenty of construction parking there.
Great, okay. This is probably a question more, or maybe it's a comment and a question for staff. One of the things that we have done, and it was actually what I would call PM, pre-max, but he's going to have to answer the question since he's the one here tonight. One of the things that we went through a decade ago or even more was we discussed, probably more than that. I'm so old that time is like almost nebulous. But we talked a lot, or we have talked a lot in the past about how do we, it's not so much just to, it's not like, hey, we're trying to push developers to do something, but we try to shrink this process in terms of time frames. And so we have certain things that run concurrently. Is that a fairly fair statement of how we do this?
Development review process?
Yes, and even the permitting process behind it. I realize that's not your bailiwick, but we try to compress this from our side, from the administrative side, and that's kind of a goal of your department. Is that a fair thing to say? Or?
Yeah, we're always looking to streamline our processes and certainly do things efficiently. The use of technology in recent history has absolutely helped to expedite plan review and the development review process. A goal of our goal is already determined. Our review time periods for staff. The bulk of the time is the time that the applicant spends developing and responding to staff conditions. But in terms of the time spent on staff review, all of our submittal deadlines are established and our meeting dates are established. Meet those and you can kind of spell out your own timeline. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you are, but I'm going to go, and it was something that Mr. Daly brought up, but one of the things that we also try to get things done concurrently, like if somebody has to go off, whatever, has to go to the county for some reason, we don't hold off on our process and say, wait until the county rules on this, and then we're going to, I mean, we may have to technically do that to take it to the commission or something, but we try to compress the process, even if they have to go outside. And I think it's really more of a question of, like, if you have to go to the state, it's really, we've had several high rises on the beach which are past the coastal construction line. Every one of them's had to go and talk to them, and every one of them's had to deal with DEP for dune restoration or something, turtles or something, right? And so in that process, we don't just say, okay, well, we're going to make it linear. You go over here, and then you call us in 6 months when that's done.
Correct. I would not say that these processes running concurrently is a new initiative, at least not one that I'm aware of in all of my short history. It's always been concurrent, and if I look at any historical records, I've always seen conditions that lead me to believe that there's always been a development review process that included conditions that mandated additional agency approvals. You know, you wouldn't develop a plan outside of our development review process to get state approvals before coming to us, because then everything that the state has just evaluated is now subject to a whole new set of conditions. So you want these things to run concurrently so that you're sure you're meeting everybody's requirements.
Okay. Thank you. That was kind of my point. It's not that we're trying to create a bureaucratic situation. We're trying to deal with the whole thing so that the process, not that you're shrinks, you don't want to be inefficient, you don't want to be not making sure you're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, but a lot of times it can run concurrently with other issues. Well, it always does, almost always does, because they're running around sending Mr. Shine to the state and to the county and whatever for a bunch of different things.
Certainly a lot more going on behind the scenes, and of course, none of the permits can be approved with the city until all of those conditions are satisfied. So, you know,
So we still have a hammer right to the very end, and before that development order comes.
So to speak, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am, Mrs.
Chairman, I just want to, the point that you're making, the conditions that we put in any approval that we do must be met before a building permit can be issued.
Unless they're phrased otherwise.
Unless they're phrased otherwise. And so this is certainly an approval that would have to be met before substantial work can be done on that site.
And these are already code requirements reiterated as conditions of this development order.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Hartzell, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on that inquiry of waiting until the Water Management District and the Army Corps looks at a project. I think there's a specific statute on it that says that you're not allowed to withhold a development order based upon some sort of subsequent, and I'll ask council that, but I think that law came about when I challenged something and then they changed the law because it required approvals from all other agencies before you can get your development order permit.
You are correct that the city can't hold an applicant hostage in that regards. But I had already advised Mr. Daly of that fact, and that's why he asked for a voluntary acceptance by the applicant, which I believe the applicant said no.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, yeah, and again, the only reason I said no is just timing. The city of Pompano Beach is a bureaucracy. It is one of the easiest bureaucracies to work with, thanks to staff. The county and the state are very different. If we submit something to the state and it gets approved by the state, doesn't mean it's approved by the city. You guys have different requirements. So you don't want to go to the state, wait a year, get something approved by the state, then come back and present it to the board, and it doesn't work for the board, but it does work for the state. So that's why it generally moves in this direction, where you get your site plan approval, then you do your construction drawings, because construction drawings are very expensive to do. So you do site plan approval, then construction drawings, and then you go through the permitting process. It's fairly run-of-the-mill for projects.
And there are certain ones of those elements of, well, it's a condition, several of them are conditions within this, that are these state processes, but sometimes they get pushed off as long as all the way to the end of when Mike Rada's group will finally get your permit out, but that's always checked at the end to make sure that all of these conditions, especially the ones that are outside of our purview, are done before you get a permit. You don't get a permit without those being achieved.
It's also in the Florida Building Code, so
Yeah.
we have to get these approvals from the
From
Florida Building.
whatever agency you're required to get.
Everyone's well protected.
Yeah.
City's well protected in this regard.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Any other questions? And if not, the chairman will entertain a motion on item number 1.
Mr. Chair, you have a pending motion that Mr. Daly has made.
Okay.
And I wanted to also make the board aware of its own procedures, that the board may on its own motion postpone any matter to its next scheduled meeting should the board determine there is a need for more information or further study, or that such a postponement is required in the interest of fairness or due process either to the applicant, the board, or to the general public. Any such postponement initiated by the board shall not be held against the applicant as a postponement. I wanted to make sure the board was aware of its own procedure.
Okay, so Mr. Daly brought up a motion to, I'm sorry, don't let me reword your motion. What was your motion, sir?
Table this item till next meeting based on the elections that occurred.
Okay. So you heard the motion. Does anybody want to second that motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions about the motion? Okay, seeing none, Bobby, call the roll on the postponement for 1 month.
Rich Daly,
Yes.
Tundra King,
Yes.
Paul Fisher,
No.
Robert Hartzell,
No.
Carrie Ann Worley,
Yes.
Carla Coleman,
No.
Fred Stacer.
No. Okay, so the motion fails 3-4 for postponement. Okay, so the chair entertained a motion on another motion for either approval or disapproval. Mr. Hartzell, go ahead.
In consideration of P and Z application, I moved that the board finds that competent substantial evidence has been presented that satisfies the review criteria and approves the major site plan with the conditions.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions on the motion? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mrs. Coleman first, and then Mr. Hartzell.
I have a question of council.
Okay?
Oh, this council, I'm sorry.
Our council. No, our
I
council.
don't have a law degree, so she ain't asking me.
Okay.
Mr. Saunders, would you please advise us on state law for denying a project that meets whatever law there is, if we deny a project that meets all requirements?
Let me redesign that question.
All right.
This board has, in all of the applications that come before you, there are review standards. Those review standards are your bread and butter of how you review each one of these applications. If there is an application which meets all of the criteria, as you have determined, then you are bound by those review standards. If you believe those review standards have not been met, then those are the items in which you must provide a response to, or else subject yourself to being overturned. So I always advise board members, if you believe there were items of the review standards that were not met by this applicant, you need to create a record of such. Because if the vote were, by chance, a denial, then you must state those findings of fact that support that denial, or subject yourself to being possibly overturned should this applicant seek to appeal. Now, in the major site plan context, the appeal initially is going to be to the City Commission. Subsequent to the City Commission, if Mr. Shine and his client desire to do the next step of appeal, they would find themselves in circuit court in order to exert that right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay?
Question?
Yes, Mrs.
Just-
Worley, go ahead.
Just for clarification also, so based on, they shared that they hit all the boxes, right? I'm just more, from my understanding, they hit all the boxes, so technically, we should be passing this through because they have hit all those boxes, correct?
If you feel that they have met all the review standards that are provided in our code, then yes, you would be, I want to say duty-bound to vote in favor of that particular application having satisfied all the review standards. But I also advise the board, if you feel that this particular project has not met some of those review standards, your decision, should the board collectively deny it, has to have findings of fact that are supporting that denial.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Sure. Was there any other questions?
No.
Mr. Hartzell?
Are we doing comment now?
You want to comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and comment. Go ahead.
All right. Look, I made the motion. I don't like the project. A lot of people don't like this project. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot of parking. I understand you guys said just because you can doesn't mean you should. That's not on us. It's on the policymakers in the city. They create policy. They tell us what the rules are and what we can do as a board, as a sitting board. We might not like it. I mean, and to me, it's my district. It means a lot. I go down to the beach all the time. I'd love to see it as a park or not developed. I'd like to see, I love the sea turtles, and I fought for the sea turtles. I fought for birds in my career. But the thing is that our hands are tied, and I appreciate you guys coming out. And I would say that, you heard our attorney say, like, there has to be competent, substantial evidence. That means when you come out, if guys appeal this or whatever you guys do in the audience, when you come to these things, bring competent, substantial evidence. Bring a planner. Bring somebody that can help, that will guide you and give that competent, substantial evidence to this board to give us some sort of ammunition in which to fight it on your behalf. But our job here is as judges, and what we do is we take in the evidence of what they provided to us, on traffic requirements and building height requirements and drainage and the whole bit, and staff signs off on it. That's competent, substantial evidence. We need to get, if you're going to come here, like, bring competent, substantial evidence if you're against that project. I think you're right. It's not a great project, and I'm sad to be the one to make the motion, but I did, and it's because our hands are tied, and I have to vote in favor of it. That's my piece.
Was there a motion already?
Yeah,
You made the motion.
Okay, who seconded it?
I did.
Oh, okay. All right, I guess we had a lot of discussion and I lost train. Okay. All right, we have is there any other discussion on the motion?
No, but I just want to thank Mr. Hartzell for putting that on the record, because that's how many of us feel. But we also don't want to see the city sued over this.
I do want to jump in and agree
Go ahead,
as well with
Mr.
Ms.
Fisher.
Coleman and Robert as well on that instance.
Okay. All right, and with that, is there any other discussion? No. Okay, Bobby, call the roll then.
Robert Hartzell,
Yes.
Carla Coleman,
Yes.
Rich Daly,
No.
Paul Fisher,
Yes.
Tundra King,
No.
Carrie Ann Worley,
Yes.
Fred Stacer.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Good luck with your project. What time is it?
It is 20:40.
Does anybody want a break, or you want to just keep going? We just got a couple. Yeah, you want a break? Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, all right, we're going to go back on the record. So we're going down to the, I guess this actually is item number 4, or is it 2 on the new agenda? Okay, so you left the agenda the way it was. Okay. All right, so we're on item number 4, text amendment to zoning code related to the measurement of height of structures. Mr. Weems, you are the man on this issue.
Okay, good evening. Max Weems, Principal Planner and Development Services. This is a staff-initiated text amendment proposal for a amendment to a few sections. Primarily Article 9, addressing the definition of building height and how that is treated towards different structures. All right, so we have some amendments in Article 3 for the zoning districts, and Article 5 for fences and walls, as well as Article 9 definition or objective. So we want to introduce a new way to measure the height of a structure from the finished floor elevation rather than the finished grade. We want to correct note references within the zoning districts and remove duplications and clarify standards. And we want to modify the fence and wall height standard to measure from the finished grade on the interior side of the fence. I'm going to start with the change in Article 9, the measurement of the height, as that's the one that's kind of driving everything else. To read this, we're introducing that measurement is, that height is, the height of a habitable structure shall be determined by measuring the vertical distance from the required finished floor elevation rather than the average elevation of the existing finished grade at the front of the structure. Then the point at which the top is measured is unchanged. Additionally, we're introducing a definition for an uninhabitable structure. Think like a gazebo or a shed, something accessory, non-principal, that shall be measured from the finished grade because there is no finished floor elevation requirement for these types of structures. And additionally, we're stating that in no circumstances can fill be used to raise the point at which the maximum permitted height of a structure is measured to a point above the required finished floor elevation of a property or development. So there's a few things going on here that could potentially be confusing. The first is the required finished floor elevation. This is a number that is determined by the building code, and you have your flood zone for a property, and your required finished floor is some distance above the grade. And so as we are experiencing more climate change, FEMA is updating their regulations to require higher and higher finished floor elevations in certain flood zones. The result of this is that the finished floor inside a building is raising. So you're having steps up to the finished floor when the ground is down here. Now the distance or the height, if you're measuring from grade, is unaffected. The habitable space within the structure is reduced because the finished floor is increasing. Unless you're measuring from that point of finished floor, you're actually penalizing development that is becoming, well, first compliant with FEMA, but also more resilient, or they're raising their finished floor in flood scenarios. So if I'm elevating my finished floor for compliance, we should be elevating the permitted top point at which that height is measured. So for structures that have this finished floor requirement, that's the point at which we're proposing this is measured. Now, should someone dump a bunch of fill on their property and now their finished floor is much higher than it has to be, that is not the required finished floor. That is above the required finished floor. So should someone desire to do that for whatever reason, they are going to still be limited to the overall height that would be required, that would be permitted from the required finished floor below. Additionally, actually, no, that concludes my thought there. Okay, so moving on. Why are we doing this? Well, we have direction in our comprehensive plan to do so. In the future land use element, we have policy 1.05.09. The city will amend zoning code as necessary to ensure that properties proposing to build with a sustainable finished floor elevation that accommodates the necessary freeboard to accommodate adopted sea level rise projections will not be penalized in relation to maximum building height. Additionally, in our climate change element of the comprehensive plan, policy 11.0616, to improve resiliency and address impacts of sea level rise, the city will consider increasing freeboard requirements while allowing the same building height from finished floor in order to mitigate the economic impacts of adaptation for ground floor uses. So, I mean, it seems like we've already done these things, but these are policies that drive our action. So in order to actually put them into effect, we need to adopt these recommendations into our zoning code. Additionally, we have certain standards within our zoning code that require that the clear height between floors are of a certain dimension. So if we're requiring certain retail frontages on mixed-use buildings to have a higher clear height with that ground floor, it's effectively reducing the heights of the stories above if they're also raising their finished floor elevation, meeting our minimum 12 feet, and then they're capped at, let's say, 80 feet, the floors above are either pinched or they lose a floor. If the code is designed to intend 8 stories, then with 80 feet, we're effectively reducing it to 7 stories as we're requiring finished floor elevations to increase unless we create this change in our zoning code. So now, while doing this, I noticed a couple of clerical edits in our zoning code that I'd like to go through now. This one is actually related to this. In our RS2 district, there's a lot of these properties in flood zones where they are required to raise their finished floor. So the standard that existed here was that the height may be increased to 40 feet rather than 35, where the lowest structural member of a building, which would be the finished floor, must be 14.5 feet or more above NGVD, which is just a system of measuring the grade. So we're eliminating that note. That note only exists within this code section to not require it because now all height within the city is measured from that lowest structural member, the finished floor elevation. So it's no longer necessary to include this note within the RS2 district. The overall height still being capped at 35 feet. In the RM7 district, it appears that I've made several more strikes, but I want to point out that those standards for historic dune vegetation line, interior and rear, were actually duplicated on the table. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm eliminating that required setback. I'm just removing a duplication and correcting the note. Additionally, there's a standard that's to encourage compatibility between residential projects where interior and rear setbacks are kind of wedding caked as the building increases in height. I didn't like the language, so all I've done here is just make it more understandable to my staff and the general public. And feel free to let me know if you disagree. Those same changes are repeated in the RM12, RM20, RM30, and RM45 zoning districts as demonstrated here. In the commercial districts, I've also amended that same compatibility language to be something that's more more understandable to staff and the public. It's a different numbers in the standard, but it's the same principle. That same change was applied to the B3 and the B4 district. In the B2 and the B3 district, we also have standards for residential structures that those don't exist in the B4 district. And so those notes that require the compatibility, the wedding cake setbacks as the building height increases, they weren't applied to the residential, and that just didn't really stand to reason. To me, those notes were just left off when that section was adopted, so I'm correcting that with this amendment. In the marine zoning district, obviously I was paying a lot of attention to the notes, so I kept that up. There was a note requiring 10-foot setback from a waterway or canal. As you can see in the table above, setback from a waterway or canal is already prescribed at 10 feet on the table. The note serves no purpose. In the TO district, keeping with our change to finished grade and eliminating language like adjacent finished grade. Adjacent finished grade doesn't really mean a whole lot. You're either dealing with the existing grade or the finished grade or a proposed grade, or adjacent is a very confusing term when you're trying to, especially when you're talking about finished. It should just be the finished grade. And so the same thing in standard O2H2E below, that we're clarifying that it's from finished grade, not existing or some other version of grade.
Let me, if I can, Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman. Okay, we've got all of these developments now where the new grade is higher than the existing grade. And if you put a light pole at the bottom of that, it's going to come up, say the new grade is 10 feet above the lower grade, so you're going to have a light pole at 7.5 feet.
So it would be measured from finished grade. So whatever the proposed condition is.
But if you put it on the property, okay, I guess you wouldn't be putting if I were the property owner on the old property, my light pole starts 10 feet below the finished grade of the new property. So my light pole cannot be higher than 17.5 feet. That's going to be shining at 7.5 feet on the adjacent grade.
It shouldn't be. You can't allow your light to
can't
go
allow it.
on the other property.
I understand your analogy.
But what you're
we have other standards to prevent
that from happening.
Right.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that there were other standards to prevent that from happening.
Yes. Okay, so let's get to fences and walls. Okay, so we have a standard for fences on retaining walls or berms. I've added that the total height of the fence on top of a retaining wall is measured from the finished grade on the interior side of the retaining wall. This is important because we have requirements like, around a pool, for example, or, just anywhere. If you're trying to keep a dog in a yard and you have a retaining wall that's 3 feet high, if my maximum fence height is 6 feet and it's unclear that this should be restricted to 6 feet measured from the exterior side or 6 feet measured from the finished grade on the interior side. If I'm measuring from the exterior side, the height of that retaining wall, which is an obligated height, is now limiting my ability to have a fence in my yard, which is a minimum expectation of development. So if I'm then restricted to have a 2-foot fence, that just doesn't make any sense. Or if I have a pool, the building code says I have to have a 4-foot fence around the pool or the perimeter of the property. So it doesn't make any sense to measure the height of that fence from any adjacent grade. It would have to be the finished grade, including the height of the retaining wall. Additionally, I've struck natural grade, replaced with finish, and then clarified that it's, again, on the interior side of the wall. We also had a standard for corner lots, and this was to ensure that my rear yard, I might have a rear yard, if I'm on the corner, I might have a rear yard on one side and an interior yard on the other, where a portion of it is in front of my house. In front of my house, I have to have a 4-foot maximum fence. If my neighbor's yard is now like their rear yard where they're permitted a 6-foot fence, what this says is that they would not be able to have a fence higher than the adjacent fence. I have no issue with these generally aligning when we're all at the same plane. But as soon as the neighbor is developing at a higher grade, this shift all of a sudden doesn't make any sense and is really limiting the ability of a fence on the redeveloped property. So that's where this language is coming from.
Again, Mr. Chair, didn't we have an issue about a condominium on the beach putting a fence around their pool when their grade was so much above, and we made them do a fence that was see-through, so that it did not.
That was on the intercoastal. Yeah.
Was it on the intercoastal?
Yes.
How is this going to affect that?
So
wouldn't they be allowed to put that solid fence up?
Well, so I don't recall if the clear fence or the glass was a condition or just their own design preference to alleviate the neighbors' concerns.
It was, we asked them to do the glass fence or the clear fence because the neighbors objected to the fence. Is there anything here that would keep us from making that a glass fence again?
Well, no, nothing in our current code dictates that that must be transparent or may not be transparent, and nothing that's proposed here is changing that. So the same ability to request this clear fence would still exist.
Okay, thank you.
So with that concludes my remarks on the presentation, but I'm open to questions as I'm.
Yeah, apparently you are going to be open to questions here. Mr. Hart, so you can go first, sir.
On the fence issue, I mean, how does that work if one lot is raised 3 feet to FEMA code? And they put the fence on that's 6 foot. The other property, the adjoining property, it now has a 9-foot fence around it?
Yes. So if in the front yard you have a maximum of 4 feet, in the rear yard and behind the house is 6 feet. If that 6-foot fence is atop a 3-foot retaining wall, the experience from the adjacent property, it would be a 9-foot difference. And so it's very difficult to reconcile what we're required to do as we adapt to these flood conditions and the existing condition. And in my mind, it's difficult to say which is correct. Obviously, existing conditions and character are important considerations, but with time, we have to create this transition to more sustainable and resilient development, especially as things like the roadways are raised, like we just heard about on Briney. We don't want to create a condition where all property is left to become a bathtub as everything around it becomes hardened infrastructure. So I struggle with this, but I do believe that this interim approach is appropriate and is really the best way to both meet our regulatory requirements and sort of create this compatible transition. What I haven't done here is present a maximum fill. So let's say finished floor requirements make my house, maybe the existing grade is 5 feet and the finished floor is 8. So that 3-foot difference, they may want to raise use fill to raise the grade of their property so that it doesn't feel like the house is elevated. But there's nothing that mandates that they fill their property in that way. Some people just may prefer this. Some codes have a maximum fill, so no more than 2 feet above the existing grade or something like this, so that there is a maximum retaining wall, but then the fence atop that retaining wall doesn't feel like such an imposition. In this amendment, I was really focused on the way that height is addressed around our code, and I found the language around fences and walls to be really confusing and compelling while we're talking about elevating properties. And then in thinking about that, the impacts between a house at existing grade and a house that's elevated with fill, that fill can be capped. We don't have this in our code, and it is something that we could evaluate should this become a real issue. But in the meantime, those properties that do redevelop, I don't want to be in a position where we say you cannot have a fence on your, without the clear language in our code, it's unclear what we should do. And it feels like this is both meeting the expectation for development while satisfying the requirements for elevating finished floors.
Good? Okay. Mr. Dowling, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Max, just so I can kind of wrap my head around this just a smidge, I'm going to use the last property that we talked about.
Okay.
For all intents and purposes, they could go up to 105 feet. with this, if they had a finished floor of 2 feet, would they necessarily be able to then go up to 107 feet, or are they still capped at 105 feet?
So the definition of the measurement is what's changing. So the 105 is unchanged. But if we're measuring from grade to cap, that is 107 feet. And so, but conversely, they could also just take fill and put an additional 2 feet on their property and then measure from grade to 105. It's the same building. So measuring from finished grade, a required finished grade, is the only way to guarantee a point on the earth from which you're measuring the height. If we're measuring from finished floor elevation, measuring from grade leaves this ability to fill a property. Now I'm up here at ground, and then 105 feet above that is the point from which I'm measuring.
So what you're telling me is that they could fill 10 feet right now and measure from that fill up and go to 115.
That's correct. And I don't want to, I have no opinions on any approved projects, but the same project that we were just referencing on the Intracoastal was because of that. They wanted to meet their parking and have 105 feet with 10 stories of use while having parking underground. So they dug out the property a little, designed a basement, filled it, so the ground is now above the basement, but that basement is above the street. And so now the ground above the basement and then 10 stories above that, it really is like 11 stories, but the grade is here.
Yeah.
It was a serious, when we had it, it was a serious problem. It caused a bunch of other problems too, but it was, it's the thought that you're talking about. That's why they want to land it on the, whatever that FEMA says that elevation is, you do whatever you want on your property as long as it's legal, but you're starting right here.
Yeah.
That's the point.
And that's the real problem. That was the problem. And we had that.
Okay.
That was a serious problem on that project. Well, whatever.
This checks out for me then, because if we're dealing with situations where people are trying to take advantage of this, I'd rather put a cap on that and say, like, this is where you start. I would assume that we.
And it's very clear, and it becomes very clear, especially as FEMA is constantly changing. And so boom, the FEMA map says this, dude, you're starting right there.
Yeah.
You do whatever you want. You want your slab higher, you want it lower, I mean, you can't put it lower, but you want to put it higher, go ahead. But you're still starting at that elevation.
This makes perfect sense. I'm fine with that. Thank you.
It's twofold in that way. It is preventing that taking advantage of, as we've loosely described, and the penalizing those properties that do increase their finished floor elevation to meet FEMA requirements.
Go ahead.
Sure. I'm intrigued by this maximum fill argument, though, because we're seeing it, especially along the intercoastal and deepwater canals, because of rising water. You know, the knockdowns and the coming in of the new properties being so much higher than the existing. I agree they need to be higher, but don't we need to set some sort of maximum at this point that can be reviewed later? What are other communities doing?
So usually the maximum is a minimal amount. So, and I think that it's to address this concern, but there's also consequences to that. Yeah. There's a lot of value into bringing fill into flood-prone areas when there's a long-term approach. So if the new finished floor is, for this whole district is, it's right here. Okay. If the, if the new finished floor for an entire section of town is far elevated and, you know, maybe the neighborhood, that the average housing stock or whatever it may be is sort of prone for redevelopment, I would not want to miss an opportunity to increase the average fill I'll use in this over the area because we set a cap. What I'd be curious to see is is what negative impacts are realized from this regulation. Obviously, the existing condition, there's negative implications. So should it become such a problem that fill is used above the required finished floor elevation, I don't really see someone wanting to fill their property so much if we're not allowing them to use that in a way that's increasing their building height. But should that become a problem, I just want to present that as a potential solution, because I have the same concerns. I wouldn't want to have an existing house and then the property next door redevelops into something that feels like an imposition, but is otherwise meeting the requirements of FEMA. And so to them, we also don't want sloped, like they elevate their property and then slope the sides, and then all of the water that's running off their house is just now in my bathtub because I'm the lowest property on the block. So I think that there's a lot of value to retaining walls and the use of fill, and
Well, a new requirement that single-family homes have to keep their runoff on their property should help with that.
Certainly.
And I see your point about not wanting to do anything now, but I think it's something we certainly need to keep our eye on.
Yes.
Well, and that elevation, I'm running into a problem like this because the property that I own and now it has a big fall off, and I've put a big addition onto the back. And in the back, my sewer line coming out, it looks like it's above the ground, because the FEMA elevation that it has to maintain. So I'm building a berm on the outside. Fortunately, I have enough of a setback, but I have to build a berm on the outside and then slope off of this to meet the minimum coverage for the sewer lines, and then I have to swale back up. So it's fun. It's the fun of building, it's whatever. But yes, okay. Anyway, that's my own comment about that. Okay, anybody else? So staff would be looking for a recommendation to the commission for approval. Well, actually, you can make either motion. Who would like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion.
Please.
In consideration of I move that the board recommend approval of the text amendment to the City Commission for their consideration on item LN 623, text amendment for zoning code related to the measurement of height of structures.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any more questions on the motion or issue? Seeing none, Bobby, call the roll on item number 4.
Carla Coleman,
Yes.
Paul Fisher,
Yes.
Rich Daly,
Yes.
Robert Hartzell,
Yes.
Tundra King,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Worley,
Yes.
Fred Stacer.
Yes. Thank you very much. Next item is item number 5. Even if it's the third item, still item number 5. Text amendment to zoning code related to the height and location of gazebos, tikis, chikis, and whatever else you whatever else you do. And the required rear yard corner triangle. Mr. Weems, you, sir.
Sure. Realizing this one, I was in a different mood this day, I suppose. My format's different. Okay, so I probably don't even have to tell you that there are so many properties in Pompano that are not compliant with our requirements for the placement of gazebos, tikis, and chikis abutting waterways. Additionally, we have standards in our code for rear yard corner triangles. The only time I ever hear about these is when people are mad that we're requiring them, and that they just are constantly creating these conflicts with what people expect to be able to do with their property and what our code permits. So we were tasked with identifying solutions for the prevalence of tiki-chiki huts and violations, primarily along the waterfront. The relevant code sections are those that require accessory structures to be set back 15 feet from a property line abutting a waterway, as well as the sections related to the tiki-chiki standards, and the requirement for an unobstructed rear yard corner triangle abutting a waterway. As I've stated, residents typically prefer that these tiki-chiki gazebos are as close to the water as possible, and usually located to one side or the other of maybe a pool or I don't know. So on the interior property line, which then puts it in conflict with the rear yard corner triangle requirement. So this preferred placement creates conflict with both of these code requirements. So the general solution is eliminate the rear yard corner triangle requirement and to create an exemption within the gazebos, tikis, and chikis, allowing them to be located closer to the waterways, exclusive of overhang. So I've tried to make this an anonymous location in the city with blur, so I apologize if anybody recognizes this. Don't look too closely. But the point here is really just to illustrate the issue. I hope not.
Not anymore, it's not.
Okay, anonymous location in the city.
I sold that problem.
But you can see that these houses, and kind of, it doesn't bother me at all. The location seems appropriate. It's on the water. They want to enjoy the water, but it's closer than 15 feet to the waterway. Also, it's within that rear yard corner triangle. The definition of this is the setback of the structure, which is typically 25 feet, and then that same dimension along the rear property line, and then those two legs forming a connection that they're, making a triangle. So that rear yard corner triangle must be left unobstructed above a height of 3 feet. That includes fences and walls, and landscaping and any other type of obstruction like a gazebo. So this whole area of the rear yard is supposed to be unobstructed. Okay, so this is the standard that says, unless otherwise provided, all structures must be at least 15 feet from the property line abutting the canal. So we're going to otherwise provide. In the gazebo...
That's cute.
In the gazebo section, which includes tikis and chikis, there's also this distinction between tiki and chiki huts. A chiki hut is something that's built by a registered Indian or Native American and it doesn't require that you obtain a building permit. It does require that you're still consistent with the standards of our code. And so that's frequently misunderstood. So they think, oh, I had the Miccosukee build it, therefore I can do whatever I want. That's not true. The placement, the setbacks, the pervious area, all must be maintained. Chikis are also required to be constructed of natural materials. You can have no finished floor, no electronics, no plumbing, nothing like this. So frequently people get a chiki installed and then they immediately convert it into something with power or plumbing, and then it's automatically a non-conforming structure if it was built as a chiki but now is defined as a tiki. And so the challenge there is that chikis are permitted to 15 feet, but tikis are permitted to 10 feet. So if somebody did install plumbing on a chiki, now they have to cut it down 5 feet. That's silly. So the solution there is all of these similar type structures are permitted to the same height. So if they do some kind of conversion, there's not going to be this code compliant issue that means now I have to lose 5 feet of my structure. Additionally, the setback. So right now, you can have a tiki chiki gazebo within 5 feet of an interior or rear side property line anywhere, not on the waterway, but elsewhere. And if you put up a fence or a wall, it can be reduced to 3 feet. So what we're looking to do is have a similar standard apply within the rear yard corner triangle, but clarify that in no instance can the overhang from that tiki abut the adjacent property. So you're not going to have, I'm 3 feet from the property line, my roof overhangs 3 feet, and now I have palm fronds, touching my neighbor's property or perhaps their own tiki, and then you have this potential fire hazard or whatever. Yeah, tiki war. So there's a minimum 1 foot separation between this overhang and the property line. Additionally, if you're on the waterway, you can be immediately abutting that waterway property line, but nothing shall extend over that property line. So should you choose to put your columns at the property line, your roof line and your columns are on the same plane. But generally, I think people will set them back a little so that the overhang can extend to the property line, not further. Okay, rear yard corner triangle. So this is the amendment as it was presented in your staff report. On the next couple slides, I'll show additional amendments, so that'll be fresh for you. I'm sorry. So this is very simple. The section reads, except as otherwise provided, where the rear lot line abuts the canal or waterway, no fence, wall, or other obstruction greater than 3 feet in height shall be located within the triangular land area formed by the intersection of the rear lot line with an interior lot line not abutting the waterway or canal. The two sides of the triangle running along the rear and interior being equal in length to the minimum rear yard depth, and the third side being a line connecting the ends of the other two sides, provided that a fence in such area may be as high as 42 feet if it is 66% see-through, and may be as high as 6 feet if it's 75% see-through. That's a ridiculous standard, and it is such a challenge to explain to applicants what that means, especially if it doesn't even feel necessary or desired by the community or producing some kind of benefit. So you can also see that what was formerly B below has a similar standard for the treatment of terraces and decks. I missed that. So what you'll see here, I've grayed out what we've already talked about. I'm also proposing to strike that transparency is required for decks or patios within that area. That's obviously what I meant to do when I started. And reorganizing so that we're not saying as referenced above and then renumbering and so forth. Also, there are amendments in Chapter 151 that define the placement of fences and barriers atop a seawall. So I've just taken the same language that's proposed there and added it here. The effect is the same, so there's actually no change in that standard. It's just the language is to reflect what's Chapter 151. And lastly, in the landscape section, it also references the rear yard corner triangle and states that anything in that area shall be maintained at a height of less than 3 feet. As you saw in that photo, that's just not standard practice. And I want to be really clear that the city is not pursuing enforcement action on these non-compliant properties. I've asked code enforcement, and there's a total of maybe 5 or 6 active cases related to tikis, chikis, gazebos within these areas, all of which are a result of complaints or Airbnbs or something to this effect. But if you look around, the non-compliance is everywhere. I know that some homeowners very much value the view that they obtain across their neighbor's property, but I just want to speak to that a little bit. That there is no legal basis except historic precedents in the city of Pompano for that right to view across a property. Riparian rights may be construed to mean that I have this right to a view. However, case law has determined that that is only the view immediately off your property and that it is not substantially or materially blocked and obstructed. What happens on your neighbor's property is absolutely not materially or substantially obstructing your view of the waterway. Some more why statements, like I've said, it's really just to alleviate the prevalence of code compliance cases. And again, not that there's so many active violations, but we're just really seeking this path towards compliance for what we otherwise wouldn't see as an issue, perhaps. Also, like I pointed out earlier, there's conflicts with code. If we say above 3 feet, it has to be transparent, but we know that pools require a 4-foot fence. We've ended up in circumstances where the building department approves a 6-foot fence, and then zoning is still requiring that they amend it for this rear yard corner triangle, and then building thinks they're out of the review. Lo and behold, they build a 3-foot fence when building required 4, and now we're in conflict with the building code. And they've paid to install this 3-foot compliant fence because of the rear yard corner triangle. Of course, we could just amend that to say 4 feet in this rear yard corner triangle, but I think it's more headache than it's worth. So some history. The transparency first appeared in our code. The earliest I could find was 1975. and it required that chain link type fence only be permitted for the last 15 feet of the interior property line abutting a waterway. And the first time we had standards related to accessory structures in a rear yard was in 1991. And that was when the standard that they should be at least 15 feet from a waterway was first introduced. So since then, we've obviously had several evolutions of those. I just wanted to provide that that's when they first appeared in our code. So with that, I'm seeking recommendation to the City Commission.
Okay. Anybody want to jump into this one? Go ahead.
Just want to confirm, since our last one we just changed, or we voted to go forward, on page 5, when we're changing it to the 15 feet, I'm assuming that's from, if it's finished, from finished height, finished grade, correct? There's a finished surface, it's 15 feet from that, correct?
Right, so that's not a change. The 10 to 15 is the change. The way in which these structures are measured is not changing. I only added that language so that I could have the habitable structure definition.
Mr. Hartzell.
I was trying to read it real fast and also listen. So, are you saying now that fences, the line of sight, you can go 6 feet to the seawall?
You can currently go 6 feet with a transparent fence.
Right. But you can go, now you can go 6 feet, it doesn't need to be transparent under the new code?
What I'm proposing is that, yes.
And when I first bought my house on the water, I thought that was awesome, this line of sight. And then my neighbors put up a jungle next door to block out that 3 feet of line of sight. Then the dog jumps over a 3-foot fence on the other side. So I think this is a long time coming. I was like, oh man, it's such a great idea at first. I mean, conceptually, it's a great idea that you have the line of sight. In practicality, it doesn't work.
I'll tell you
So I think
another
it's a
way it doesn't work is when your neighbor goes and buys a 35-foot boat and jacks it up and puts it in your line of sight because you can't stop that. So you could see the side of his boat now is what you can see because he's allowed to do that. So it's kind of like it's just silly. I mean, and the non-compliance is like, how many of your, I mean, you probably don't have a client that's compliant on the water.
No.
It's just insane. Nobody wants it. This is a long time coming.
Our recommendation was always to put wheels on it, and that's DOT's problem.
Man, we got the comic club tonight, don't we? Okay. All right, so any comments on that? And if not, somebody want to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion.
Yes, Mr. Dallek, go ahead.
In consideration of P&Z application number LN659, I move that the board recommends approval of the text amendment to the City Commission for their consideration.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, Bobby, call the roll.
Just,
What?
you forgot to open the public comment on this.
Oh, okay. Does anybody from the public want to speak on this? You all hit on the points I wanted to say. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Yeah, okay. That's fine, I'm good. You're good? No? Sorry. We'll close the public hearing and start over. Okay.
And who seconded that motion? Mr. Hartzell?
Yes, Bobby.
Okay. Rich Daly?
Yes.
Robert Hartzell?
Yes.
Paul Fisher?
Yes.
Tundra King?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Worley?
Yes.
Carla Coleman?
Yes.
Fred Stacer?
Yes. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is audience to be heard. Does anybody want to speak on any other issue that was not on the subject tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. Approval of the 2025 board dates and deadline calendar. Everybody have their calendar? Any questions, comments? No? Yes? Anybody want?
I move approval.
Okay, move approval.
Second.
We have a second. We have a motion and a second to approve the calendar. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Reports by staff. Mr. Weems, you have any report tonight?
Report.
Okay. On this end, Bobby? Council?
The only thing I wanted to do is make sure, I talked with the clerk's office today. Looks like all the board members as well as alternates have completed the webinar related to ethics and sunshine law. So I appreciate that. And I believe everyone has complied with their reporting obligations with the state. And if not, you will hear from Kervin.
Okay. Thank you very much. Board member discussion. Mr. Dow, you have anything for us tonight?
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher?
No report.
Mrs. Coleman?
No report.
Mrs. King?
No report, thank you.
Mrs. Worley?
This is past my bedtime, but no report, thank you.
Past your bedtime.
I get up at 5.
Okay. Mr. Hartzell, you don't have a bedtime, so you can't tell me that story.
I got like a 30-minute speech going here.
You do?
I hope you're hungry.
It's past our bedtime, okay?
Anyway, Max, I want to thank you and staff. You really did a good job on preparing all this, and I'm always, like, when I come here, I just see it. You guys just do an absolute fantastic job, and I know I always thank you, but I really do. That everything is always set up. Bobby sets us up perfectly a couple days in advance. He'll call you to make sure you got it. Mr. Saunders, you did an awesome job. You got our cheat sheet, and I saw it sitting there. I was like, oh, I'm so happy. So I know tonight had a contentious, it was probably our first contentious issue in a long time. And I think you guys, you guys presented it well and as neutral as you can be on these things. And, it's hard, and I appreciate what you guys do and the rest of the board as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Surprisingly, I have nothing tonight. So, yeah, that'll shake your head, won't it? Tell who wants to go home and have some ice cream or something. Okay, and it's not past my bedtime yet, so anyway, that's it. And with that, I move we adjourn. Okay.